Kate Rothwell is an award-winning author who also published under the name Summer Devon. She wrote romances of all sorts, including gay historical romances. Kate's 43 books and novellas were published with Kensington, Simon & Schuster, St. Martin's, Harlequin, Alora's Cave, Liquid Silver, Loose Id, and On Her Own. About half of those publishers have gone out of business, but Kate refuses to take responsibility for that.
I'm Kate. I'm part-time secretary in the Biomolecular Sciences Department, and I was a full-time writer until about 2019. Why I asked to have all those publishers listed in my bio, when I was trying to plan what I was going to say to you, I thought about how my books were published during a time of huge change from about 2003 to 2019, and I decided it was interesting to hear from somebody who lived through a change from big publishers to indie publishers, from a really staid process to Wild West. But when I put up a note on Facebook last week asking my Facebook friends what I should talk about, no one said, "Oh, talk about publishing." They all wanted to hear about the books, not the business. So the questions I got were, how do you get your ideas? Why did you write romance instead of other types of books? And how is romance different from other genres? How is the process of writing romance different from writing other fiction? So, all right, first of all, how I got my ideas. The first published book, this is actually from the library. Somebody Wonderful was a mass market paperback put out by Kensington. And it was an example of where I know where the idea came from, because usually when people ask me that, I'd say the corner of Auburn and Fern, because what I think about books is I took walks, and that was the corner where my brain would switch on. And I'd start with the characters, learning about them. But this is one book I can remember clearly. I was reading the autobiography of Harpo Marx, and he was talking about the way cops in New York would hit the curb with a billy club, and it would echo. And I thought, that's really kind of cool. And at the same time, I read an article in which a guy discovered that it was astonished to learn that his nickname was an insult. His name was Mick. And also, I was watching The Perils of Pauline, a silent movie, and I started thinking about all these things at the same time, and I wanted to make a heroine like Pauline, only somebody who isn't TSTL, which is, TSTL? Too stupid to live. That's a term that comes up a lot in writing romances.
And it comes up a lot for all of us.
Yes, TSTL. So the book began to percolate, and so at least one book has an origin other than I had a deadline or it came to me on a dog walk. So that's the first question. Okay, the backstory of how I started writing romance. I grew up in a family of intellectuals. They didn't have romances in the house, but they would have gotten me some if I'd known they existed, if I'd known they were out there. But they didn't, except for Pride and Prejudice, which now I know why I read it so many times. Anyway, so, and I've been a writer for a long time. I wrote a lot of short fiction with, I took a seminar with C. Michael Curtis, who was the editor of the Atlantic Monthly. I wrote short stories for literary journals that have since gone out of business. I think all of them. I haven't looked, actually. And then I think the whole thing about writing romances came when I visited a friend of my family as she was having radiation therapy. She was, like my family, always read literature and big, beautiful books and books about economic theory and not comfort reads. At her request, I went to the library and picked up nothing for her but Regency romance. And I made a snooty comment because I was a snooty person, and I said, why all these? Why not poetry? And she said, well, I need these. And later on, when I went through a tough time, I got what she meant. My comfort reads had been mysteries, and I remember picking one up a couple days after my father died, and I thought, nope, that passing scene with a dead body was too much. So death is not what I wanted to face at that moment. And later, when I would take the train to go see my ailing mother, I lived in Connecticut, she lived in D.C., I would listen to romances. When I sat with her and she dozed, I'd read romances, usually Regency romance. They were my gateway drug. And I noticed in the libraries of the places where she was, the nursing home, there were lots of Regency romances. I could pick one up every time I wanted. So what I learned And what somebody else said beautifully is that genre fiction fulfills a need. I'd say a vicarious jolt of love via romance, but really, genre fiction in general is about justice. Facebook friend and romance writer Judith Arnold joined in last week's conversation, and she said she defined it as a search for justice. In crime fiction, the criminal is caught. In thrillers, the world is saved. In mysteries, the mystery is solved. And in romances, the lovers wind up together. Genre fiction is about making the world right and just and fair. And when you're caught at a time when your own life is bereft of fairness or love, or feels that way, genre fiction can feed that need. And when I began to respect the whole genre a lot more, not just reading it with the cover over the cover, the Fabio cover hidden. I started, in fact, now I really wanted a Fabio cover and I never got one. Anyway, it's about, once I got that attitude change, I began to see that the world could use more fluff and love. And once we moved north, I really started writing a lot of romance because I lost my job as writing for articles for a magazine down in Maryland where we were living. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. What is romance? Here's what it isn't. I've been accused of writing porn, and that's okay with me. I don't mind being accused of that. I have written erotica. Okay, what's the difference between romance, erotica, and porn? The only other time I was interviewed on tape, that was the question I was asked. So I had to answer it right here. Okay, porn is for strict physical titillation. Erotica is for physical with at least some emotional connection to the characters, and romance is mostly about arousing the emotions in the readers. That said, there are at least, even in the least hot books, with the preachers and whatnot, there's always some physical tension between the leads. But I mean, honestly, I think emotional arousal is something every novel wants to accomplish, right? I mean, love, repulsion, indignation, some form of titillation, rather than just conveying thoughts or ideas in a novel. Okay, so porn doesn't need the well-developed characters. Romance has to have a story and characters you can root for. And most of all, it must have an HEA, happily ever after, or an HFN, happy for now. And let me repeat that. Romance has to have a happy ending. No deaths. Titanic is not a romance. Wuthering Heights, oh no. A lot of Nicholas Sparks, not romances. That's because readers know what they want and they expect their happily ever after. And, they look for that on the shelf labeled romance. Pride and Prejudice is 100% a romance. I mean, even with the lovely satire and the commentary about society, it's still romance with the hero and heroine growing and changing for the better due to the other's influence. Okay, why is writing romance different from writing other books? First of all, you have to know everything about the two main characters. I think this is true of any book, genre fiction or otherwise. But I think you can also have a good mystery with almost cardboard characters and a marvelous plot, like Agatha Christie. But to have a good romance, you have to make those characters three-dimensional. The author should know not only their favorite flavor of ice cream, but why they like that ice cream. And almost none of that goes on the page, of course, but it's in your brain when you're thinking about the characters, the whole backstory, so that when they interact and form a bond, it's consistent with their character and what they need, their deepest fears and ambitions. The conflict, why they can't be together, should be soul deep and more than just outside influences. There's going to be the outside story, but it should also be the inner story, which is what romance is about. The conflict has to feed into their fears and ambitions, even the ones the characters don't know themselves and might find out as they grow in the story. They help each other change or learn or resolve those conflicts. It's also not women's fiction, which is fiction with women as the main character and maybe some romantic elements. I'm torn because it's nice to have categories for books to organize a bookstore. On the other hand, too many books don't find potential readers because they're shelved. That's kind of the only reason I forgive Amazon. They have all these subtags. So you can find books that have tea readers or cat owners or embroidery by typing it in. Okay, so let me describe romance by talking about one of the ways to compose it. I'm a pantser, somebody who writes by the seat of my pants. The other way to write a book is a plotter. I start at the beginning of a story and write until I reach the end. at least in an ideal world. That way the story stays fresh for me. If things fall apart, I could go back to all the notes I took at all the conferences and workshops about writing and look for why there were issues. I would try to turn myself into a plotter, somebody who plans every turning point in their book. And a lot of the plotters I know use the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. They use that for all sorts of genres, but especially romance. And so there's the 3 acts. I'm not going to go into it because I could be here for several hours talking about it. So that's what a lot of plotters do, and it's also why I learned that there was a difference between romance and other books. A friend of mine who wrote romance as a very strict plotter would plot out her stories on these giant sheets of paper with Post-it notes. I think she used Blake Snyder's Save the Cat screenwriting beats for her stories. And she wrote mysteries too. And for her mysteries, for both things, she used colored Post-its. Green for the story action, blue for the hero, gray for the villain. And she'd have to show the motivation and conflict for the 2 characters. But she pointed out that their interactions didn't have the weight and growth of a romance. Her books were mostly green Post-its when it was mystery, because people read mysteries to find out what's going to happen next more than what somebody's going to say. For her romances, there was a blue for one hero, yellow for the heroine or the other hero, gray for the villain, green for the story action, and then also she would put in, I don't know how she did, but she would put in lavender for how the relationship grew and changed, lavender Post-its. And so she'd put up a separate entry for each of when there was a change with the lavender note too. The point is, the mysteries were one color and or not one color, but not that many colors. And the romances were like, whoa, flower garden there. The individual character arc is important, but so is the romance. And things like sexual tension or actual scenes in bed, if you're not a closed-door writer, that's another thread. And it has to be intense and change. The intensity has to change with the story as well as the characters. She would put up red Post-its for the notes for the scenes. She was aiming for Harlequin Blaze. Is that the one that you had to have 2 sex scenes per book? And so she was Hey, the readers know what they want.
I thought it was per page.
Sorry. Can she go? That's my boss. Okay, so anyway, she would write thrillers, and she wanted to make sure the sex scenes didn't show up at dumb moments. She did not like it when they were hiding from the bad guys, so she would make sure that there was red in there. Anyway, so that was a revelation for me to see how many things have to happen in a romance for it to be a good book, an okay book. All right, now what's it like being a romance writer? This is where I get to kvetch at you people. Here's where I get the guff. I've been asked more than once, usually by one particular neighbor, when will you write a real book? And I said, maybe after I finish the 80,000 words I've written and send them off to the editor to be published. And since I was guilty of this kind of snobbery when I was young, I wasn't angry about it. I'm not like other romance writers who say often enough, yeah, we laugh all the way to the bank. Romance is a big industry. Romances sell better than any other genre. Romance readers are voracious. They read a couple a day. So back to the whining. A phrase I dislike is bodice ripper. For one thing, it's historically wrong. Bodices are hard to rip. Chemises were probably rippable, but first you have to get through the bodice and the corset. So, And anyway, most of my books, I mostly wrote, toward the end especially, historical gay fiction, male. Why did I write that? Because the periods I wrote, Victorian and Regency, it was illegal, so there's an outside conflict, although I would not make that the main conflict because that gets really boring book after book. But also in those times, it was easier for men to spend time together. You didn't have to just meet up in a ballroom or on the, it was an easier time to write about people's relationship growing and changing when they could spend time together in different situations. I also wrote it because that's what people wanted and there was a need for it. I wrote for money, guys. All right, my least favorite line, and I got a lot more when I was cuter, was, do you do a lot of hands-on research for that erotica? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I always answer the same thing, no, but I'm planning a murder mystery and I could use help figuring out the poison I want to avoid. So that's me talking about what it's like to write a romance. I'm going to also, if I have time, talk about how the industry changed. Do I have time? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about writing romances before I move on? Okay? No hands? Good. All right. When I started writing, publishing was only with the big ones, big publishers. And the way to consider yourself a romance writer or any kind of author was through Kensington, Dorchester, well, for romance, Harlequin, Mills, or Boone, Simon & Schuster, St. Martin's Press, those big publishers. In fact, if you were self-published, it was a black mark against you because you didn't have the ability to learn from the editors and agents. So we're talking about a really well-established kind of, I loved it, thank you, way of life in the big publishing world. There were smaller publishers, but they didn't have the distribution and they were not the same powerhouses, but then they did. Soon after I started Samhain, or Samhain it's called, Alora's Cave, Lucid, those other, the groups, the book publishers I had mumbling about at the start of this, all those guys started to take off. They were in Borders and Barnes & Noble, and more often than that, the reason they really prospered was they started publishing ebooks long before the big publishers had the ability to do so. And they sold them at their own sites, and there were other ebook sellers, I can't remember, there was really, really good ones, that would form a community with the readers and the authors together and sell the books. And they all went out of business because Amazon wiped them out. There was a wonderful way to get the books to the readers and do promo without actually having to get up in front and talk to people. Okay, so when my Kensington editor didn't take any more about books, and then she had the nerve to leave the company, I shifted over to Alora's Cave. And Alora's Cave was a hoot. I think someone should write a book about Alora's Cave. The CEO of Alora's Cave pointed out that their success was linked to the anonymous world of ebook selling. And men don't mind going into a store to buy hot fiction, but women were held back until ebooks. And Alora's Cave was wild. They had a giant bus. I have a picture of it somewhere with their cavemen on the side. And it was, pictures of guys that would ride around on the bus and come off and entertain people at book signings. I actually... and they signed with Simon & Schuster, and Alora's Cave had a deal. Do I have one? I have one of those books. Well, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Here's an Alora's Cave cover with Simon & Schuster novellas. And that's one of my, Sniff the Stocking. I really love that cover. Oh, and one more thing about, before we get into the death of that kind of publishing. Here's a cover flat that I got for my first book. And can you see the little hole in there? The publisher put that in there. And that's because when the publisher would send back the mass market paperbacks, they would rip off the covers. And if there's a hole there, they knew that they weren't going to get, that was not actual cover. So this book did really well. It translated into a bunch of languages through the publisher, and then after I got my contract back on my own, it was in, it was in, oh gosh, what's the name of the really big place that sells books? Oh, no.
Borders.
No, yeah, it was in Borders. No, I'm talking about Walmart. It was in Walmart, okay, you guys? That was the only book I ever had in Walmart. Anyway, all right, back to what happened with Alora's Cave. They were a big deal, and then eventually what happened was Amazon. The parties that went away. It was a great time. I never went to the parties, but I heard about them, and it was a great time. Okay, so the thing about, even with the smaller publishers, the big change that for authors was that during the time of the big publishers and the smaller ones, the money went in one direction from the publisher or agent to the author. I don't think we got much. You were a Samhain editor. Did we get an advance? I can't remember. We didn't get much in the... Yeah, but we got a much bigger cut of the profits than you would with a traditional publisher, and we didn't have to earn out. With the traditional publishing, you have to earn out before you get the royalties. You have to earn out the advance. So anyway, most of those publishers are out of business now. The ones you listed, they're all gone. There's some that are still around. I still get money from Total eBound and Juno and a couple of other ebook publishers, but most of them are gone. I think any that had any kind of overhead got driven away if they sold their books on their site. So once the self-publishing began to make big money, RWA, which stands for Romance Writers of America, which used to be the powerhouse of romance writers. If you were a romance writer, you'd go to their conferences because that's where the editors and agents would gather, and that's where you'd do the workshops. And they were sneering at self-publishing, and they were sneering at all kinds of subgenres. But then they started taking them. They let the self-publishing authors enter contests, and then self-publishing stopped being a reason for big publishers to reject an author. And in fact, publishers use them as slush piles. They see which books sell well and pick up those, try to get those authors to sign contracts. But not all the authors are going to do that. My friend over here is an editor for Marie Force, who is a very big name in romance, and I think she had a couple of big house publishing, and then said, "No, I do it better on my own. I do it much better on my own." So she has the money's going out from the author now to the editors, to the cover artists, to the proofreaders, to the publicists. So the money thing has changed. And I don't know how agents make a living these days, because I don't know. I had agents for a while, but only one sold a bunch of books to Audible, and otherwise I didn't sell anything. Okay, so it's a wild world out there, and there are a lot of bad books out there. People who don't care, or people who do but can't afford to buy an editor, or can't afford to buy a proofreader, or even bother sending it out to a beta reader. But, there are readers who love those authors, so I've learned my lesson. I'm not rolling my eyes at anybody. But now there's AI, and that's, oh dear. I checked, there's a link at Atlantic Monthly about, there were 184, 190, I forgot to check again, authors whose books were scraped for AI, and they're putting together a lawsuit. One of the books was mine. Okay, so anyway, that's what I came here to talk about. I don't write anymore, and I miss it, but I loathe the promotion of self-publishing, and that's what I was doing toward the end. I was terrible at it, too. How did I do? I sold a lot of foreign rights. I'm still selling foreign rights. I make maybe $100, $200 a month with the stuff, not much. But all right, you know how you were impressed with my Walmart, or I was impressed with my Walmart thing? Okay. I was a hint on Jeopardy last year.
I was impressed with that.
Yeah. So there you go. You want to know what it was? It was wrong, actually. For success with this kind of novel, a good pseudonym helps. Kate Rothwell chose Summer Devon to show her books were hot. Well, no, but yes, romance writing was. So that's my talk, you guys. And I have, if anybody speaks, I got a few Danish ones. I think this is Chinese. I have a Japanese, but I forgot to bring it. I have these books that they sent me, and I don't read the languages. So if anybody speaks Danish, I got 2 Danish. Anyway, so there you go. That's my talk.
I want to know what scraped by AI means.
I'm not exactly sure. They took the words from the books and threw them into a big pot to help AI
Develop,
yeah, how to develop. I think they took almost all of Nora Roberts' books, and she's got hundreds of books. And Stephen King and Nora Roberts are the ones saying, no, you're not using from my books.
How do they know? Because they're cited in things they write?
No, I don't know. I will send you a copy.
Well, don't use clever terms.
Well, it's not my term. Scraped. I mean, did you read about this?
Yeah, they have to train the AI, and so they feed it information.
Right, I got that.
And if you go onto like ChatGPT and you put in a passage, and you can ask it right in the style of Stephen King, right in the style of Nora Roberts, it will change it to their particular voice, because those authors have a distinctive voice.
So yes.
And the funny thing is that you ask it to write in the style of Shakespeare, it will make it into Shakespearean poetry, and it's.
So does that mean Shakespeare got scraped by AI?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
take it all the way
Anything-
full circle. I
any-
just don't understand the scraping.
Yeah, I don't either. Anything that was off, no longer copyrighted, got scraped. So, but then they started doing copyrighted material, and the authors are not happy about that. I'm delighted because, hey, look, it makes me real.
Are they required to then say this book was written by AI?
No,
Well, the Amazon does want you to say that now.
that's new though, isn't
That's
it?
new. You can be AI generated or AI assisted. So they don't care if your blurbs are written, like the back cover copy is written by AI, but if the content is written by AI, they want you to put it on. But they're
Seems
it's an honor
incongruous that someone who would
system.
use it would say it.
Yeah, it's an honor system, so people who are using AI to write their books properly aren't
Aren't
going
gonna
to
say.
say it.
No,
Yeah.
you know, when I had books, well, I haven't looked lately, but a couple people pointed out that a few books on Amazon were actually my books. They had taken the contents, plopped them down, put another author's name on them, put another cover on it. So that happens a lot. I haven't checked it lately. And there's pirating books, you know. Hundreds of thousands of copies of my books are out there. I don't know if anybody's reading them, but they're pirated. So,
It's hard to make a living as an author.
well, hard to make a living anywhere, but yeah. So,
Other questions?
At the beginning, you showed us a copy of Somebody Wonderful and said it's from the library. What library did you get that book from?
oh, yes. Yes, let me talk about this book, this copy. It's from this library in this university because that guy there is my husband. And he was made, what did you win? You won some,
I got
promoted or something. And they asked him what book did he want to put in the library. And he picked my book.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
And it's been taken out
Badly
once. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I want to go back because you've been published by St. Martin's and I mean, how did you write the first book? I get the first book that took off.
This guy.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
one.
So I'm fascinated by this.
How did I write it?
Yeah. I mean, kind of. How did you get it to a point where
Oh, we got
someone
was
wanted to publish
sellable.
it?
Oh, this is, Linda. This is interesting how I got it published. One of those RWA conferences in New Jersey, they had an editor was supposed to come through and was taking submissions. The first three chapter, and that's how I think they still do it that way. First 3 chapters and a synopsis, which includes all spoilers. And it's usually like a page long. That's how you submit to a big publisher. And she didn't show up. And I wasn't on the list to talk to her, but she said, in her note, she said, even if you didn't show up, you can send me your book. So I did, and she took it. She didn't even ask for a full. She liked the first 3 chapters enough that she took it on spec. The second book in the series.
And then you wrote the book.
No, I had actually finished that book. This is the book I didn't finish, and I didn't look at my contract, and it was due in a month. So you stayed with the kids, and I wrote this book. And it had to be 90,000 pages, or 90,000 pages, God. 90,000 words, because they're mass market, and they have to fit in the racks a certain way, so they have to be this size. I don't think that's still true anymore, because I don't think the racks are so prevalent. They used to be in all the drugstores and whatnot. And when this cover came out, my editor said, "Oh dear, it looks like a story about a dead child." So anyway, Hillary, I loved Hillary. And did I already mention the fact that there's a bunch of books over there? I have, that book was, I don't know what that is, Portuguese maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I think I did mention that. So never mind. Yes, if you speak it. And so, yeah, after that, I got an agent, and she didn't sell any books. And most of the places I went to after that were, you didn't need an agent. A lot of those places back then, you needed to have only agented submissions. And St. Martin's, I knew one of the editors, and it was a short fiction. And then there was some like this one, which was Through Alora's Cave, but also this is published by Pocket Books. So, any other questions? Yeah.
How many books would you say, like, every story that you've written, you can confidently say have been published in some form, or are there like 100 books somewhere under a bed, like in a room somewhere in your house?
I have a couple. I have a few. I have a lot of starts that just failed. And I've been writing. I mean, I was writing short stories when I was in my 20s, and I got my first book published when I was, well, Andrew was 2004, so I was 34. Yeah.
But you've gotten a lot of stuff published before that.
Yeah, I did get a lot.
We have a box in the attic of 5 1/4-inch floppies, another box of 3 1/2-inch floppies, and then a computer with all the stuff on it.
Yeah,
You know what?
a lot of stuff.
And there's a lot of things on those floppies.
Yeah.
But not very many finished books that didn't publish.
I have a few, and I'm embarrassed by them, you know. I have a few that got published by Alora's Cave, and that I thought, oh, I'll self-publish these, and then I started reading them, and I thought, oh, no. Oh, dear.
So, the thing you don't like now, right, the self-publishing and the self-promotion, if a publisher came to you and, a big publisher and said, we want you to write another one, would you?
I would try. Yeah. If they did that heavy lifting, oh, yeah. And I mean, all right, here's another reason I stopped publishing. In 2016, Trump got elected. And this is mildly political. You guys can shut this down. But I had been volunteering with refugees for a long time, and a lot of them were Muslim refugees. And I was really scared. I did not want to see any harm come to them. So that sort of took up my time and energy. I just didn't really feel like writing romances.
We can blame it on Trump.
Yeah.
It works for me.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely so.
So for audiobooks, are there any readers that are extremely good and popular?
Well, I think so. Cornell is one of the guys who read one of my books, and he has they have followings. People love them. I hired, for a bunch of our books, they got sold to Audible, and they took care of everything. And then, I forgot to mention my co-author. I wrote a bunch of books. Of those books, like 18 of them, I wrote with somebody else, and that was so much fun. I'd write a chapter, she'd write a chapter, I'd write a chapter. Her name is Bonnie D., and she's, I really like her books. Anyway, we hired our own reader, and I liked him too. So.
And his name is Cornell? That's the last name?
That's the one guy who read some of our books that I thought, oh, he's pretty good. His name, the guy, I can't remember his name. I know his real name, but he had used a pen name for our audiobooks, and I can't remember. His real name is Jason Zenobia, but his pen name, I can't remember what it is. Sorry. You can look up one of my self-published audiobooks and listen to a sample and see if you like it. Mark James. Yeah, I liked his stuff, but that's why we hired him. Yeah, but there's others that have. I pick books based on the audio reader, like Simon Vance and Jonathan Cecil. I love their voices. So, anyway, that's it.
All right. Thank you very much.